hear me? Awesome. How is everyone doing? It's like rainy outside. Okay, cool. So this talk is called So You Want to Work in Distributed Systems, which is kind of a misnomer because it's only sort of about distributed systems. And prior to doing anything, I kind of wanted to just, play a little clip during my first little, my first GothamGo 2 years ago in 2016.
Go, go, gopher. Go, go, gopher. Hey, hey, hey. Chen receive.
Oop, where did my slide go? Hold on. I'm going to get that back in a second. Sorry, y'all. A little technical difficulty there. Okay, I'm going to drag this back. Sorry. Live talking is hard. Okay, I'm going to go back to present mode. And bring this back. Oh, I think I thought that this was actually Twitter, and then I X'd that out. Happens all the time, because I use Twitter all of the time. Okay, now we're back on track. So this is more about my journey into distributed systems, and if you happen to take some inspiration of that, that'd be great. And if not, then it's just a really awesome story. So I'm going to tell you, I think a lot of my life is pretty serendipitous. Like the way that I got into computer science itself was because some random dude on Omegle told me to try computer science when I was signing up for computer science classes. Like I was studying pre-med at the time, so like cellular biology and neuroscience, and there was like this random chat roulette, if you don't know what Omegle is, and you get matched with like random people. And so I would have this weird phase where I'd like talk to people like 5 hours at a time on this random chat roulette. And this one dude was like, yeah, you should try intro to computer science. Isn't that crazy? Like some people are like, oh, like I started computer, like learning about programming and stuff like when I was 13. And I was like, yeah, I started because of Omegle. Anyways. Back on track. So in a not so far past, I was a senior looking for full-time opportunities as a senior in college. And so this was around like August 2016, so only 2 years ago. I had just ended my internship at Behance here in New York. They're based in Union Square. Really, it was a really awesome internship. And there I was working on back-end web development. And working in web applications. I knew at the time that I no longer really wanted to work on web development. It just wasn't a right fit for me. And so I knew that I wanted to pursue something else. The reason why I didn't want to pursue web development anymore was because I'd spent 2 internships in it. So I had a pretty good idea of like what the scope involved, how far I'd be able to get in probably about like 2 years, and I didn't see that path was right for me personally. So back again to serendipity, again, this was an instance in my life where I knew that this was something I didn't want, and so something came into my life again, and I just like asked the universe, what do I do? So my friend, she told me to follow this woman. Her name is Jessie Frizzell on Twitter, and so a lot of my life is actually influenced by Twitter. I got my last 2 jobs from Twitter, actually. But, millennials. So she told me to follow Jessie Frizzell on Twitter, and she talked about Go, about containers, about Kubernetes. And so this opened me up to a whole new world of this wonderful world of cloud-native technology and ultimately a piece of distributed systems. So I immediately knew that I wanted to work in this area despite not knowing anything about it, because this also corresponded to the time when I was taking my last semester in college, and I was taking my first distributed systems course. The reason why I knew I wanted to work in distributed systems is because it involves a lot of things. The scope was massive, and you can go as broad or as in-depth as you want. Like if you wanted to dive into networking, into persistent storage, into state, all these things is like all under the realm of distributed systems and keeping things online and available with as low latency as possible, right? So this is where Go comes in. So about 3 or 4 months before my first set of like full-time interviews, I learned Go. And this is like partly hype train, but partly also the reality of how approachable Go is and how influential it is in the distributed systems world. So I learned Go. I wrote a crappy demo API so I can like prove that I had some depth of knowledge in Go, and I added some tests to it. And then I started interviewing at companies like Mesos, Rancher Labs, Medium, anything that I could get my hands on Go. I knew that this was the path to get into distributed systems, and I'll tell you why in a second. Or at least my vertical of distributed systems. It's obviously like a very large scope of a topic. And this was also a time in November 2016 I came to GothamGo, which is super awesome. And I just wanted to share that because this to me is very full circle, where I started my career, I started learning Go, I spoke at a lot of conferences, and I have yet to speak at GothamGo, and here I am with a job in distributed systems, working as a systems software engineer. I work at a company called Heptio, and I'm back at GothamGo, so this is really awesome. So after that, I interviewed at a company called Rancher Labs, and that's where I landed my first job in the realm of Kubernetes and containers, and I'll talk about that in a second as well. I graduated in January of 2017, and I started my job at Rancher Labs in March 2017, and now I work at Heptio in Seattle. So it's super awesome. Both were really awesome jobs. Both were our words. English is hard sometimes. And I've spoken at conferences like KubeCon, Open Source Summit, AlterConf, Rocky Mountain Ruby, and DevConf, which was my first international conference in South Africa. So I just wanted to pause and take a second to say thank you to the Go community for really jumpstarting my career in this world of cloud-native technology. So here, I mean, you all are at a Go conference, so you probably know all these things, but here, to me, are the most important aspects about Go. So in college, there were 2 languages that I learned, and the 2 were Java and C. And to this day, I still have no idea to really, truly use either productively. And so like the first thing that I wanted to hit on is that Go is such an incredibly succinct language. And there's no way that it would have been able to pick up Go as quickly as it did. Again, it was like 3 or 4 months. It was crazy without Go being a succinct and small and having a small language spec. I remember, I think it was at GothamGo last year. I don't know, a lot of you probably know who Carmen is. And she was talking about like how she printed out the entire friggin' like Go spec, and it was this small. And it was a normal like whatever like 12-point Times New Roman or Arial or whatever font. Like that's, to me, is pretty crazy. And the obvious comparison here is to Java. To me, Java is really hard. Java is really freaking verbose. And developing without like Eclipse or IntelliJ is virtually impossible, right? I literally do not know how to start a project in Java without looking up a freaking tutorial. Like, you have to import all these jar files, and it's just really crazy. The other thing is like compiling it as a language is really hard, right? Java, you have to depend on the JVM, where it's a virtual machine. And it has to like compile it to whatever operating system that you're working on. And Golang depends, the way that we compile our programs is through static binaries, right? So you can just run go install and go build or whatever you prefer with like flags or whatever. And it will just magically work. And to me, that's that's incredibly enabling and magical. And the other thing is like, if you wanted to have more specific things, the language structure allows for that, right? And so that to me is what succinct and efficient is to me, and it's really enabling as a developer. Like as a developer, I don't really need a lot of bells and whistles, right? I can like build things, but I just need it to be easy to do these things. And to me, that's what Go was. The second thing is garbage collection, and you notice that I don't mention things like a lot of popular, one of the popular Go features is like the channels and all that stuff, right? I'm not mentioning that because to me it wasn't like super necessary when I was first learning Go and getting a job in Go. But the second thing that's really important to me is garbage collection. So again, the other language that I focused on a lot in college was C. And I think most software engineers don't write code where they value efficiency over clarity, right? I don't think that's something that most software engineers do. It's something that they keep in mind, perhaps. But if you had to choose between either, and it was like either one or the other, I'm going to choose clarity first, right? So the reason why I bring this up is that thinking about memory management just isn't something natural that I think comes to human beings in general, let alone software engineers. When you think about common bugs that arise in C or C++, it's memory management. And these are huge, these are really huge problems, right? And so when I work on the level of distributed systems where I have to think about like a lot of different systems like collaborating together, the last thing that I want to think about is freaking memory management on that low of a level of the language spec. I need my language to take care of that for me. And thinking on that low of a level would probably literally make me go insane, along with the other things I need to think about. And it constantly feels like in distributed systems, I'm like hitting gophers, hey, go. But like I'm hitting gophers because like one problem pops up and then another problem pops up and I'm hitting that and I'm like trying to like hit as many as possible so that there's like no gophers popping up in my programs. And so those are the two main language spec feature thingies, very technical term, that were most important to me when I was learning Go. And third, I would say community is a feature. So I think this is a combination of like opportunity meets preparation in terms of why Go is so popular today. Like one comparison I think that's often made in terms of system language is Rust. And honestly, if Docker was written in Rust, like I would probably be talking about Rust today. But like the main thing that I think that Go has that a lot of other communities either don't have or don't have as maturity of is its community. And the reason why I say this is because to me, getting into Go, the thing that was super instrumental and important was the immediate availability of people who were able to help me. On a meta level, community-wise, in distributed systems, we have popular projects like Kubernetes, Docker, and then along those veins, in cloud-native infrastructure, there's a world of other projects that I could list all of them, like Heptio and all of these things, right? And on a more one-on-one level, we have the Go for Slack channel. There were people immediately on hand to help me. Cassandra mentioned this earlier in her talk, where when she mentors other people learning Go. Yes, it is very true that if you do not have people immediately on hand to help you with your immediate task, I probably will be discouraged. Like I could not depend on forums because the feedback loop was just way too short. Right? Like I need help immediately. It's like if you, like during your day-to-day job, right? If you had to wait like 20 minutes for help every single time that you needed help, you probably would just be really frustrated with your job. Also, in terms of content, I read a lot of again, as you probably all know, was a lot of Dave Cheney and William Kennedy's blog posts to answer really basic questions. There was the Go Playground, which I still use today when I don't feel like, when I'm being lazy and I just want to see if a program works, or I somehow forget how printing works. I don't know. Sometimes this happens, I'm human, and brains sometimes without enough caffeine don't work. Yeah. And then other things like Go by example, and there was a Go programming language tour. To me, the content was there and the community was there, and I learned about Go at a time at the right time in my life, at the right time in Go's development, when there was a lot of resources. And to me, the thing that's most important is content and the community to meet it, right? And so these were some important things to me about Go and why it's so successful in the distributed systems world today. Again, it's some things, I think language-wise, in terms of why something is popular, yes, Go is a systems language, but there's other systems languages as well. But the thing that stands out the most about Go is the community that sort of brings it above that barrier in terms of why it is the language that cloud-native technologies use today. Yes, there's still Java and things like that in distributed systems worlds, but there's reasons why, right? Really popular topics use Go today. So this talk is only sort of about distributed systems. It's more about, I think in a lot of my talks, one of my main themes is I always try to center the message around my experience. And I want to repeat again, if it works for you, apply it to your life. And if it doesn't, it's a good story. So this is also specific to working with Kubernetes. I just kind of want to see a show of hands. One, how many of you work in distributed systems today? OK, so maybe I would say about 40%. And then how many of you know what Kubernetes are? Let's start with containers. How many of you know what containers are? Cool. How many of you know what Kubernetes is? Cool. And how many of you know, how many of you use both day to day? OK, cool. So something that I wanted to bring up is, so based off of that, hold on one second, let me see, OK. So something that I wanted to bring up is that the distributed system world is a pretty homogeneous landscape in terms of who works in it right now. First of all, it's pretty obvious that I'm fairly young in my career, and a lot of people in distributed systems, there's not a lot of new college grads that enter this world, right? And another thing is that racial demographic-wise, it's probably a lot of white dudes. And yeah, gender-wise, it's a lot of dudes. And so one of the things that's really important to me is to do a lot of public speaking, to be able to show whoever is out there in the crowd that wants to enter the world of distributed systems, that they can too. This is also for the folks who are not super familiar with containers or Kubernetes. They use it day to day. So just in case, I'm going to do a really quick run through of what Kubernetes is. So the main question that containers and Kubernetes solves is, how do we get applications to run in the cloud? And that you have issues in distributed systems worlds like high unexpected traffic, application failures, scalability, availability, and efficient resource utilization. So what is a container? To me, it is a baby computer inside of another computer. Where the baby computer is the container, and the other computer is the server. Very technical, I know. And why do we want a baby computer inside of another computer? It's easier to transfer around. There's resource isolation. It encompasses the application environment. And it's a means to abstract away your infrastructure. So what we see here, for instance, is our baby computer, which is our container. This is in the pink. You can ignore the stuff on the right. And then we have our server. And then we have our lovely little web application. And what we're trying to do is put this into the cloud. So what we do is we have our, oh, I probably should have changed that awkward to go. But we're just going to ignore that. So we have our lovely little web application. We're going to containerize this by defining our infrastructure as we want Alpine 3.6.2. We want Python version 3.7. And we have a lot of setup scripts, which you see on the right. And we never want a situation where you say, oh, well, it works on my machine. This does not fly in production, right? And so we've containerized our application, put it into our baby computer, and now it's asking itself a lot of questions, because there's a lot of other things that we need to do to be able to organize our baby computers. So our container is going through an existential crisis. It'll ask questions like, where should I live? So this is under the realm of scheduling. How do I talk to other containers? This is under the realm of networking. How do I talk to the world? This is under the realm of routing. And what happens if I get sick? This is under the realm of failure recovery. So that, to me, is what Kubernetes is. It is an abstraction away from your baby computers to be able to organize your baby computers, and that's all that Kubernetes is, for those of you who are not familiar. And so I think it's funny because I entered this industry only knowing containers and not the pains of setting up infrastructure based on virtual machines. So a lot of my experience in terms of working in distributed systems has been actually like backtracking and learning about these struggles, because it's super important to be able to get people to convert to more ephemeral infrastructure. So this is sort of what to do next, or at least things that worked for me. So something that you can do if you wanted to develop on Kubernetes is you can work on a small project. So for me, that was deploying an Nginx web server onto Kubernetes. What I did was I containerized an application. I deployed my application on Kubernetes. So this involves like learning Kubernetes primitive platform primitives like the pod, deployment, services, ingress controller, and then after that I learned about package management, which involves Helm. So if you were ever looking for a project, I think that's always the first start. This is sort of a tie-in in terms of like why I love working on Kubernetes and Go. Like, by all means, Kubernetes is not the only vertical in distributed systems. It happens to be the vertical that I work in. So the community is young, right? In comparison to a lot of other languages, a lot of other verticals. So there's a lot of room for influence, right? And I think when I look to target something, I want to make an impact on the community, on the technology, and to me, youth in a community is prime for that. There's a lot of, and what that means is that there's a lot of content to be created and an audience that devours it. Right? So like the content you create, it's like not really fun if no one wants to read it. But because there's a community there, there's the content, there's the audience, and also the means to be able to distribute your content. And something that I wanted to bring up is that there's something to be said about community sustainability. So currently, for instance, I will go ahead and say this, is that I think there's a lot of hype that goes around cloud-native infrastructure, even Go sometimes. And we need to be more realistic in terms of saying what the downsides are and where these tools will not work for you, or maybe offering up like a pivot point in which if you did want to pivot onto these tools and technologies, to be able to have this meeting point of like, let's slowly transition into these things. And I think as these technologies are developing, we're seeing more case studies. A lot of the goal of Kubernetes is pluggability, and it's a huge bet, also with Go, on open source. And I think that open source will win because I really hate vendor lock-in. But that's another story that I won't go into because it'll turn into a rant, and I'm sorry. So what to do next? If you're interested in Kubernetes, it's very much the same as if you were interested in getting into Go. There's a Kubernetes Slack channel that, again, it's super available, super immediate. There's a community there to meet you at where you need them to. For me, and also other ladies or other other ladies in the crowd, is that there is actually a Women in Kubernetes private Slack channel. If you wanted to join, hit me up on Twitter, and I will add you. It's really fun. And honestly, like, one of the things that I do with it is, like, prior to any KubeCon or like any other community event, I'm like, hey, who wants to go grab some wine? Because that's apparently what women do. But the other thing is, I mean, to me, it was really important in terms of like meeting other people in the industry, because there's far and few between. Also, something useful is the Linux Foundation Introduction to Kubernetes course. That is free, and you can actually also get certification in Kubernetes if you want to gain more not notoriety, sorry. If you want to have a more official, like if you want to approach someone and look more official, I guess, there's certification for this. And also KubeCon videos online. And this is honestly like how I got into do anything that I do, is just find a community, hunt down resources, and like pursue people who do these things on Twitter and ask them for a job, ? So I just want to say thank you, and like the way that I wanted to end is that I think a lot of times we like encourage these things like diversity and inclusion and all that, and you don't really have like a really tangible grasp of like what that means. And to me, like, I definitely would not have been able to be here speaking to you all with the amazing job that I have, and the other amazing job that I have had, without people that like looked like me, who I could reach out to immediately, who were able to meet me where I was. And so I just want to say thank you to the Go community for really jumpstarting my career in distributed systems. So yeah, thank you for your time.